A sharp slap cracks through the silent courtroom, freezing every soul in place. Judge Clara May, unflinching, locks eyes with the smug cop who dared strike her. "You think you're untouchable, Sergeant?" she says, her voice ice-cold as whispers ripple through the stunned crowd. In that moment, Charleston's corrupt system begins to unravel, and Clara's fight for justice ignites. Charleston, South Carolina, wraps you in its old-world charm like a warm hug. Think cobblestone streets, grand neoclassical buildings, and a faint echo of history in every breeze. But beneath that postcard-perfect surface, the city's always been a tinderbox, simmering with tensions just waiting to ignite. That morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, Judge Clara May strode into the courthouse, her presence commanding even in the quiet dawn. At 62, Clara was a pillar of understated power. Her silver-streaked hair was swept into a tight bun, and her sharp brown eyes caught every detail, down to the sly slights some thought they could slip past her. In Charleston's legal circles, Clara was a legend. She'd climbed the ranks from defense attorney to prosecutor to judge, becoming the first black woman to sit on this bench. That milestone still ruffled feathers among some of the city's old guard who couldn't quite stomach her authority. Clara, though, wasn't one to let others write her story. She knew the cost of breaking barriers. People didn't just push back, they acted like you didn't exist. As she passed through security, the guards gave her respectful nods, some flashing quick smiles. But Clara's mind was elsewhere, already sifting through the day's docket. It was supposed to be routine, but a nagging instinct told her something was off. She'd felt this before. Too many times, a tiny spark, a missed detail, a casual slight, could set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. As she neared the courtroom, the clerk greeted her with a strained smile. "Morning, Judge May. Sergeant Boone's already inside," the clerk said, her voice tinged with worry she couldn't quite hide. Clara's brow creased. Boone. The name hit like a sour note. Sergeant Travis Boone, a third-generation cop, always polished, always smug, was a fixture in Charleston's law enforcement. His record was spotless, too spotless, the kind that screamed buried secrets. Clara had skimmed his file more times than she cared to count, and each time his arrogance practically leapt off the page. Her gut tightened as she stepped into the courtroom. There was Boone, slouched at the prosecution table, arms crossed, face sour. Across from him, a nervous 16-year-old sat with his public defender, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Boone didn't even glance at Clara as she entered, too busy snapping at the clerk with a tone that dripped impatience. "Let's move this along already," Boone barked. "I've got better things to do." Clara didn't blink. She glided to the side table, picking up a file left there for her. The room was sparse, just a handful of journalists, a few attorneys, and a couple of officers lingering at the back. "You with the defense?" Boone's voice carried a mocking edge, his eyes raking over Clara like he was sizing her up. She didn't respond, her focus on the file, her movement slow and deliberate. The air in the room thickened, but Clara stayed steady, unshaken. Boone's patience frayed. He stormed toward her, stopping just short of her space. "Hey, I'm talking to you!" His voice spiked, sharp and demanding. Clara still didn't look up. And then it happened. A sharp crack split the air, a vicious, open-handed slap that echoed off the marble walls. The sound froze the room. Gasps rippled through the sparse crowd, the hum of the overhead light suddenly deafening in the stunned silence. Clara didn't move. Her cheek burned, but she didn't touch it, didn't flinch. Slowly she turned to face Boone, who stood there, momentarily shocked by his own audacity, but with no trace of remorse in his eyes. His lips twisted into a sneer. "You got no idea who you're dealing with," he muttered, his voice thick with contempt. "People like you need to learn your place." A whisper from the back broke the silence. "Oh my God." Another voice, softer, asked, "Is she okay?" Clara ignored them. Her eyes stayed locked on Boone, steady and unyielding. The heat of the moment swirled around her, but she held her ground, her presence a quiet storm. Boone, oblivious to the shift in the room, puffed out his chest, acting like he'd just won something. "You don't get to walk into my courtroom and throw your weight around," Clara said, her voice low but razor-sharp. "I don't care who you think you are." Before she could finish, a hush fell over the room, so heavy it felt unnatural. The clerk's voice barely carried from the back. "She's not in her robe." The weight of what had just happened started to sink in. Boone's attempt to brush it off was unraveling. This moment was now etched into the room's memory, undeniable. Clara took a step closer, her movements slow but deliberate. "Is this how you treat officers of the court, Sergeant Boone?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of her decades in this system. Boone's face twitched, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Clara didn't waver. She stepped up to the bench, turning to face him fully. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Boone's gaze met hers, and for the first time, a crack of doubt appeared in his smug facade. "Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" Clara's voice was ice-cold, each word deliberate. Boone's mouth opened, then snapped shut. His tongue flicked nervously, searching for an excuse, but nothing came. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know it was you," he mumbled, already backpedaling. Clara's eyes narrowed, slicing through his flimsy defense. "That's not what I asked." She paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy and accusing. "Did you put your hand on me?" Boone tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. He was losing control, and he knew it. The room was watching. The cameras were rolling. This wasn't something he could bury. Clara stood taller, her gaze unrelenting. "You assaulted a woman in this courtroom, without cause," she said, her tone as unforgiving as stone. And with that, the dam broke wide open. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, Clara's words hanging like a blade over Boone's head. He stood frozen, his earlier swagger gone, replaced by the sinking realization that he was no longer calling the shots. The room, buzzing with whispers just moments ago, now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Boone tried to claw back some control, his voice rising as he stepped toward Clara. "You were in my face," he snapped, desperation creeping into his tone. "I didn't know it was you. You weren't in your robe. I thought you were just some—" Clara cut him off, stepping forward with a presence that silenced him instantly. "Some what?" she asked, her voice low, cold and cutting. "Some nobody you could bully? Some woman you could slap because she didn't bow to you?" Her words hit like a tidal wave, washing away Boone's bravado. He stumbled back, his face betraying a flicker of fear, something Clara had never seen from him before. He'd always acted untouchable, but now the reality of what he'd done was crashing down around him. The room felt alive with tension. Journalists scribbled furiously, lawyers shifted in their seats, and the officers at the back exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's calm in the face of Boone's aggression had flipped the script entirely. She wasn't just the victim here, she was the one in charge, and she was making sure everyone knew it. Boone blinked, his mouth working uselessly as he groped for an excuse, but there was nothing to say. His actions had spoken louder than any defense he could muster, and they were damning. Clara's gaze didn't falter. She knew this wasn't just about her. This was about a system that had let men like Boone skate by for years, unchecked and unchallenged, and she was done letting it slide. "I've spent my whole career watching guys like you mistake a badge for a free pass," she said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut glass. "You've counted on silence to cover your tracks, thinking no one would dare call you out. But today, Sergeant, that silence ends." Her words echoed, and for the first time, Boone wasn't the one holding the power. Clara had taken it, not with a shout, but with the quiet force of truth. The room felt it. A shift. A turning point. This wasn't just a courtroom spat. It was the start of something bigger. Clara turned back to the bench, her movements deliberate, and took a deep breath. The gavel came down hard, the sharp crack shaking the air. Boone flinched, still stunned, as Clara's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Sergeant Boone," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, "did you or did you not just strike me in this courtroom?" Boone's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, someone to bail him out. But no one moved. Everyone was watching him now, watching him crumble under the weight of his own actions. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice weak. "It was a mistake." Clara's eyes narrowed, her voice slicing through his excuse. "A mistake?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "You slapped me because I wasn't wearing my robe? That's your story? That's what you're going with?" The room shifted again, the tension thick as fog. The gavel slammed down once more, the sound final, like a door slamming shut on Boone's excuses. He was trapped, and he knew it. Clara wasn't letting up. "You've had 20 years of mistakes," she said, her voice unyielding. "I've read your file. I've seen the complaints that somehow always vanish. But this time, Sergeant, there's no rug big enough to sweep this under." Her words silenced Boone's last attempt at a defense. The weight of the moment was crushing him, and he could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. Clara stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. This wasn't just about him. It was about everything he stood for. Boone was the face of a system that had failed too many, a system built on power and privilege that ignored the voices it was supposed to serve. "If I were a white man sitting on this bench," Clara said, her voice calm but fierce, "would you have dared lay a hand on me?" Boone's silence was deafening. His eyes betrayed the truth he couldn't speak. Clara turned, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the faces of those who'd witnessed it all. The air had changed. Boone wasn't just facing a courtroom incident, he was facing a reckoning, one that had been brewing for years. The truth was out, and there was no stuffing it back in. The courtroom crackled with tension, every breath held as Clara's words sank in. Sergeant Boone stood like a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing, grasping for an excuse that wouldn't come. There was no way out of this one, no words, no justification could erase what he'd done. The silence was unbearable, heavy with the weight of what had just unfolded. Boone's mind was racing, his usual cockiness replaced by raw panic. He'd gotten away with so much, harassment, brutality, bending the rules, but today was different. Clara May wasn't just another person he could push around. She wasn't backing down, and the room could feel it. The only sound was Clara's steady breathing, a quiet anchor in the storm. Everyone waited for her next move. Boone stood frozen, unsure, but Clara was crystal clear in her purpose. She wasn't letting this slide. She'd made that plain, and now, as she straightened up and locked eyes with him, she was about to drive that point home. This wasn't just about her, it was about a system that had shielded men like Boone for far too long. "Do you know what your real problem is, Sergeant?" Clara asked, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. Boone shook his head, still not grasping the depth of his mistake. Her eyes stayed on him, unrelenting. "You think the law is something you can twist to suit you, something you can bend to fit your ego, But today, you're going to learn that the law doesn't bend for people like you." She let that sink in, her tone cool and deliberate. "And I'm going to make damn sure of it." She turned to the clerk, her voice crisp and commanding. "Please enter into the record that Sergeant Travis Boone has admitted in front of this court to physically assaulting a sitting judge without provocation." The clerk, pale and shaken, started typing, her fingers trembling slightly. Boone's eyes flicked to the corners of the room, where two small red lights blinked steadily, cameras recording every second. His face twisted as the reality hit him. This wasn't going away. This wasn't another mess he could make disappear. Clara didn't stop. She turned to the bailiff, Officer Mills, who stood rigid at the back, his eyes wide but steady. "Officer Mills," she said, her tone sharp yet controlled, "is this courtroom under video surveillance right now?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mills replied, his voice firm despite the tension. "Good," Clara said, nodding. "Then we'll make sure the record includes visual proof of the assault that just took place. Sergeant Boone might have thought he could get away with this, but the cameras don't lie." Boone's face went ashen. He was a man who'd spent his career hiding behind a badge, believing he was untouchable. But now he was trapped, cornered by his own actions with nowhere to run. Clara could feel the room tightening around him. The journalists, the lawyers, the officers, everyone who'd been watching passively was now seeing the walls of Boone's power crumble. He wasn't the untouchable cop anymore. He was a man under the microscope, exposed by the very system he'd manipulated for years. "You've had 20 years of dodging accountability," Clara said, her voice slicing through the heavy air. 20 years of skating by while others, people without badges, paid the price for your actions. You've used the system like a shield, but that shield's gone now." Boone's chest heaved, his anger flaring, but no words came. Clara's presence had stripped him bare, his arrogance nowhere to be found. Her voice grew stronger, addressing not just Boone, but the entire room. "This isn't just about me getting slapped in my own courtroom. This is about a system that's let men like Sergeant Boone run wild for far too long. It's about corruption and negligence that's festered, unchecked." Her eyes swept the room, meeting every gaze. "And that ends today." Boone's face twisted, his anger bubbling up, but he held back, knowing he was out of moves. Clara didn't give him a chance to regroup. "Sergeant, you're now under formal judicial investigation for criminal assault on a public official. You'll be detained until further notice, and I'll make sure this is handled with the seriousness it deserves." The room gasped, the weight of her words like a thunderclap. Boone's career was over, and he knew it. No amount of connections or clout could save him now. Clara May was a force he couldn't outrun. "Officer Mills," Clara said, her voice calm but unyielding, "please take Sergeant Boone into temporary custody. He's not to leave this room. No cuffs. He's still a sworn officer, and we'll keep this professional. But make no mistake, he's not walking out of here until this is settled." Boone's jaw dropped. "This is crazy," he sputtered, panic creeping into his voice. "You can't do this." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "You knew enough to hit me," she said quietly. "Now you'll face what comes next." Mills stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Boone's arm, guiding him toward the door. Boone's body stiffened, his face red with rage, but no one in the room moved to help him. Clara watched as Mills led him out, her eyes steady. The air in the room had shifted, the finality of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. It was a turning point. "Clara," the prosecutor from the vandalism case called from the back, his voice shaky. "You want to keep going with the docket?" Clara turned slowly, the room waiting for her answer. She wasn't just a judge now. She was the spark for something bigger. "I'll decide that in a moment," she said, her voice firm. She turned to the gallery, her gaze steady. "But first, I've got something to say to everyone here." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Clara wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone. The system had failed. "What happened here isn't just about courtroom rules," she said, her voice carrying across the space. "It's about the law. It's about trust in the system." Journalists raised their phones, capturing every word, every moment of history unfolding. Clara's voice cut through the tension. "If the law can't protect those who uphold it fairly, then we're not a democracy. We're something far darker." The room held its breath, her words a call to action, a demand for justice, and Clara May wasn't done yet. The courtroom stayed hushed, the air thick with the aftershock of Clara's words. It was as if everyone there, journalists, lawyers, officers, knew they'd just witnessed something that would ripple far beyond these walls. Clara wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a symbol, a voice calling out a system that had protected the wrong people for too long. The truth was out now, loud and undeniable. This wasn't just about one cop losing his cool or one slap in a courtroom. It was about a machine that had been humming along in the shadows, shielding those who abused their power, silencing anyone who dared to speak up. Clara took a steadying breath, her voice unwavering as she pressed on. "What happened here today isn't a one-off. It's not about one bad cop making a dumb move. It's about a system that's been broken for years, letting people like Sergeant Boone act like they're above the law." The room seemed to close in on Boone as her words landed. He stood there, fists clenched, jaw tight, trying to hold on to some shred of control, but it was too late. Everyone could see him for what he was, a man who'd used his badge as a free pass for far too long. "I've seen the reports," Clara said, her voice sharp and piercing. "I've read the complaints. I know how they've been buried, how your buddies and bosses looked the other way every time you crossed a line." Her eyes locked on Boone's, unrelenting. "But that stops today." Boone swallowed hard, his throat dry as he scrambled for something to say. 20 years in law enforcement, and he'd never faced anything like this. For the first time, he was staring down real consequences, ones he couldn't charm or bully his way out of. Clara was done talking. She was ready to act. She turned to Officer Mills, her voice crisp and commanding. "Officer Mills, take Sergeant Boone into custody. He's not to leave this room. I want him detained while we move forward with the investigation." Boone's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and fear. "You don't know who you're messing with, Judge." Clara's gaze hardened, unflinching. "No, Sergeant. You're the one who doesn't know what you've stepped into. This isn't about power plays. This is about justice, and you're going to face it, same as anyone else." The room exhaled as Mills moved to escort Boone out. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a reminder of his shattered pride. The courtroom was still reeling, but something new was in the air now, a sense that accountability was finally taking root. Clara stood tall, her presence unyielding. She wasn't just a judge behind a bench anymore. She was a force, fighting for everyone who'd been crushed by a system meant to protect them. The room felt it. This was a turning point, a moment that would echo beyond these walls. But Clara knew this was just the start. Taking down Boone was one thing, but the bigger fight was against the network that had propped him up. She turned to the clerk, her voice clear and sharp. "Please enter into the record that Sergeant Travis Boone has admitted to assaulting a sitting judge without provocation. This is now part of the public record." The clerk hesitated for a split second before her fingers flew across the keyboard. Clara's eyes stayed on Boone as he was led out, his face pale with the realization that this wasn't going away. She knew this moment would set everything in motion, a chain reaction that would bring the whole corrupt network into the light. But she wasn't done. Clara turned to the room, addressing everyone there. "This isn't just about what happened here today," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "This is about trust in the system. It's about making sure those who carry badges, those trusted with power, answer for it when they cross the line." Her gaze swept over the journalists who were scribbling and recording every word. "You all saw an officer assault the judge presiding over this courtroom. Now you'll see what happens next. Because if the law can't protect those who uphold it, we're not a democracy. We're something much uglier." The journalists were all in, their cameras flashing, capturing the moment. Clara's words weren't just a statement. They were a call to action, a demand for change that couldn't be ignored. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She could feel every eye on her, waiting for what came next. She wasn't just a judge now. She was the one who'd make sure this moment wasn't buried, that it wasn't just another forgotten story of injustice. "I'm not just a judge," Clara said, her voice steady and fierce. "I'm part of this system, and it's time we fixed it. The cameras are on, the witnesses are here, and we're going to make sure this moment sticks. It's going to spark the change this city's been needing for years." Her eyes flicked to Boone, now nearly out the door, his face drained of color. Clara May wasn't just a judge. She was the reckoning this system had dodged for too long. As Boone vanished through the courtroom doors, Clara stood in the stillness. She'd started something today, a movement, a spark that could ignite a revolution. This wasn't just about one slap. It was about everything that led to it, and everything that would come after. Clara knew the fight was far from over, but she was ready. When you've spent a lifetime breaking barriers, fighting battles no one thought you could win, you don't back down. Not now, not ever. Clara stood firm in the wake of her stand, the courtroom still buzzing with the energy of what had just gone down. Journalists whispered to each other, officers exchanged uneasy glances, and the air felt different, like the ground had shifted beneath everyone's feet. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was the opening shot in a war against a system that had protected the wrong people for far too long. Clara had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no crossing it now. She didn't let herself linger on the moment. There was too much work to do. She turned back to her desk, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. Boone was down, but the rot he was part of ran deep, hiding in the shadows of Charleston's power structure. Clara was determined to drag it all into the light. A soft but urgent knock broke her focus. Carter Lang, her loyal bailiff and friend of many years, stepped in, his broad shoulders tense, his face set with purpose. "They're moving quick, Clara," Carter said, his voice low but steady. "Word's out that Boone's been detained, and the Union's already circling the wagons. They're not going to let this slide without a fight." Clara nodded, not looking up from the papers strewn across her desk. She'd seen this coming. The police union was a powerhouse, always ready to shield its own, no matter how dirty their hands. Boone was just one piece of their machine, a machine that had been running smoothly for years, protecting those who wielded power without question. "I figured as much," Clara said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "But this time, they're not burying it. Not on my watch." Carter's expression softened, but he didn't push back. He'd seen Clara take on tough fights before, but this was on another level. The whole city was watching now, and the press was eating it up. She'd handed them a story that would ripple far beyond Charleston. "They're going to come for you," Carter warned. "They're already digging into your past, looking for anything to make you look biased. You know how they play this game." Clara glanced up, her eyes sharp. "I've been playing this game longer than they have," she said. "They can try to rewrite my story, But I'm not letting them control the narrative. Not now, not ever. Carter's jaw tightened. This isn't just about you anymore, is it? Clara's gaze drifted to the window, her mind turning inward. It never was. It's about everyone who's been silenced, everyone who's been crushed by a system that cares more about protecting power than delivering justice. Her words hung heavy in the room, but Clara didn't pause. She had a plan. She always did. This fight was bigger than anything she'd faced, but she was ready. She'd always been ready. "What's the word from Internal Affairs?" Clara asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Carter nodded. "They're digging deep. They've got Boone's record, the complaints, even some body cam footage. But it's bigger than we thought. There's a whole network involved." Clara didn't flinch. She'd suspected as much. The corruption wasn't just Boone. It was woven into the fabric of the police department, the courts, maybe even the mayor's office. "I want every case Boone's touched pulled," she said firmly. "Every arrest, every trial, every complaint. Flag them all. And I want the names of every prosecutor, every officer who looked the other way." Carter's eyes narrowed. "That's a tall order. It's going to take time, and it's going to rattle a lot of cages." Clara's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Good. Let those cages shake. They should have been rattled years ago." As Carter left to start pulling the files, Clara felt the weight of the fight settle on her shoulders. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that would spark a reckoning, one that was long overdue. Outside, the courthouse was alive with chaos. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras trained on anyone who came or went. The city was buzzing, the story already spreading like wildfire. A respected cop had assaulted a judge in open court. Charleston was shaken, but Clara knew this was just the first domino to fall. She wasn't naive. The forces she was up against, the union, the political machine, the corrupt officers, were all tied together in ways most people never saw. But Clara wasn't most people. She'd been in the system long enough to know its weak spots and how to break it wide open. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Agent Rosalind Keene, the Internal Affairs officer who'd been working with her since the incident. "We've found something. You need to see this." Clara's pulse quickened, but she stayed calm. She stood, grabbing her coat from the chair. Whatever Keene had uncovered, Clara was ready to face it. Nothing was going to stop her now. Clara moved swiftly through the courthouse halls, her heels clicking on the marble floors, the buzz of activity around her fading into background noise. The press was out in force, their cameras a constant presence, but Clara's focus was razor-sharp, locked on the message from Agent Rosalind Keene. Something big had been uncovered, something that could blow this case wide open. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel the shift coming. The corruption wasn't just a few bad actors, it was a system, and she was about to expose its roots. She stepped into the conference room where Keene was waiting, her face as grim as ever. Keene was all business, no patience for fluff or incompetence. And today, there was a fire in her eyes that told Clara this was serious. "You've got something?" Clara asked, her voice steady but eager. Her pulse thrummed, sensing the stakes were about to climb higher. Keene didn't bother with small talk. She slid a thick folder across the table. "We've been tearing through Boone's records," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's uglier than we thought. He's not just a rogue cop, he's part of a network. Officers, prosecutors, even judges, all covering for each other." Clara's eyes narrowed as she opened the folder. The first page was Boone's record, nothing new there. But as she flipped further, her breath caught. Reports of missing evidence, tampered body cam footage, complaints of excessive force, all swept under the rug. Then she hit a set of internal memos flagged for review by the city's legal department. "These are sealed," Clara said, scanning the pages. "How long have they been buried?" "Too long," Keene replied, her tone dark. "We've got a lot of players in this, Clara, and it's not just the cops. Some of these memos have signatures from prosecutors like ADA Carson Ramsey." Clara's stomach tightened. Ramsey. The prosecutor who'd always been a little too cozy with law enforcement, always quick to cut deals with Boone. His name popping up wasn't a shock, but seeing it in black and white hit hard. Keene flipped to another page, a 2019 civilian complaint. The details were brutal. Boone had beaten a 17-year-old during an arrest. The body cam footage? Missing? The case? Closed for lack of evidence. Clara's pulse raced as she read. This wasn't just a red flag, it was a screaming alarm that had been ignored. "Who handled this?" she asked, her voice low. "Detective M. Whitaker," Keene said, pointing to the name. "Boone's old training officer. He signed off on closing the case. And there's more. Other complaints. Same story. Missing footage. No evidence. Cases dropped." Clara leaned back, her mind spinning. Boone wasn't just a bad cop. He was a symptom of a diseased system. But the next document stopped her cold. Keene slid over a transcript from 2 years ago, recorded in a locker room. Boone's voice was clear, laughing as he spoke to someone unidentified. "You ever see her up close?" Boone's voice said. "That Judge, Clara May? Struts around like she owns the place, thinks that robe makes her untouchable." Another voice, muffled but audible, replied, "She ever come after you?" Boone laughed. "Let her try. I've got people higher up than her. She steps out of line, one complaint, and she's done. Activist Judge? Gone." Clara's stomach churned. She'd known Boone didn't respect her, but this was a direct threat, a plan to take her down if she pushed too hard. "How many people heard this?" Clara asked, her voice a low growl. "We're tracking the second voice," Keene said, her lips tight. "We think it's Ramsey. He's been in too many of Boone's cases for it to be anyone else. And this wasn't even the only one. This was buried in a low-priority investigation we didn't know existed until now." Clara's mind raced. Boone wasn't just a problem. He was part of a conspiracy, one that reached into the courts, the mayor's office, maybe further. But Keene wasn't done. She slid another document over, a wire transfer, $15,000 from the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund to a state judicial endowment. Except the money didn't go to scholarships. It was funneled into a legal defense fund. Clara didn't need to ask who it was for. "Boone," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of it. "This is bigger than I thought." Keene nodded. "Way bigger. That fund covered Boone's legal fees last year after more excessive force complaints. It wasn't for scholarships. It was for keeping him in the clear. The union's been funneling money to protect him." Clara sat still, processing it all. The corruption wasn't just deep, it was everywhere. The mayor's office, the courts, the police, it was all connected. "I need more than papers," Clara said, her voice steady with resolve. "I need names. Everyone who's been part of this cover-up, I want them exposed." "We're on it," Keene said, her tone grim. "But this goes beyond Boone. We're not just fighting him." Clara nodded, her mind already mapping out the next steps. She'd taken down Boone, but this was just the start. She wasn't going to let the system stand. Not now. Not ever. "This isn't over," Clara said, standing. "We're just getting started." The weight of the day pressed heavy on Clara as she walked back to her chambers. The courthouse's chaos felt distant, drowned out by the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. She'd uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Sergeant Boone, and each revelation only deepened the pit of deceit. The walls she'd trusted, the ones meant to uphold justice, were built on lies, and tearing them down was going to take everything she had. There was no victory lap, no moment of triumph, just a heavy sense of duty, a fire in her chest that wouldn't let her rest. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield, and Clara was ready to fight. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Carter. "They're coming for you. Union's pressuring the mayor. Ramsey's involved. We need to move fast." Clara exhaled, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wasn't surprised, but she wasn't scared either. This fight was about truth, and truth didn't bend to threats. Her office was quiet when she reached it, the papers on her desk a testament to the fight ahead. She locked the door and sat down, adrenaline still pumping. She wasn't tired, not yet. There was too much to do. Boone was in custody, but that was just the first step. The real battle was against the system that had propped him up. She'd already ordered every case Boone touched to be pulled, but now she needed to connect the dots. Ramsey, the union, the mayor's office. They were all part of this, and Clara was going to make sure they all faced the light. Her phone buzzed again, a call from Agent Keene. Clara answered, her voice calm but firm. "It's getting uglier, isn't it?" she asked, cutting to the chase. Keene's voice was taut. "You were right. Ramsey's tied to Boone's cases, and it's all linked. Documents, wire transfers, even chats between the union and the mayor's office. But they're clamping down hard. They want this buried." Clara's eyes narrowed. She'd expected resistance, but the mayor's office already? The corruption was higher than she'd feared. "Get me everything," Clara said, her voice steady. "Names, dates, anything tying Ramsey, the union, and the mayor's office together. I want this network out in the open." Keene paused, the weight of the request clear. "Clara, this is dangerous. Move too fast and they'll shut us down." "I don't care," Clara replied, unflinching. "We're in this now. No backing down." The line went quiet before Keene responded, her voice resolute. "I'll have the files to you in an hour. This is going to get messy." Clara leaned back, staring out at the darkening sky. Let it get messy. Let them see what happens when the truth comes out. The next few hours dragged like days. Clara pored over Keene's files, each page painting a clearer picture of the corruption. It wasn't just Boone. It was a whole system, from the courts to the mayor's office, all working to protect their own. Her phone buzzed again, Carter with another warning. "Union's filing a grievance. They're gunning for your seat, calling you biased." Clara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't surprised, but she wasn't backing down either. "Let them try," she muttered, the fire in her chest burning brighter. "They want a fight? I'll give them one they won't forget." As night stretched on, Clara worked through the files with relentless focus. She was piecing together a story they'd fought to keep hidden, a story of corruption, abuse, and power that had festered for too long. The system they'd built was unraveling, and Clara wasn't stopping until it was in pieces. Carter returned at dawn, his face grim as he surveyed the papers on her desk. "You've been at this all night," he said, concern in his voice. Clara didn't look up. "This isn't going away. We need to stay ahead of them. The union's already trying to discredit me." Carter set a new file in front of her. "Here's what we've got so far. Names, dates, proof of collusion. Ramsey's tied to at least 3 cover-ups of excessive force. We've also got docs linking the mayor's office to Boone's defense fund. It's coming together." Clara looked up, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just about Boone anymore. It's bigger. We're going to expose every last one of them. They thought they could bury the truth, but it's coming up now, and they can't stop it." Carter nodded. If we go public, it'll hit like a bomb. Clara stood, her gaze fixed on the city outside. I'm not worried about the fallout. The truth needs to come out, and when it does, they'll know who brought it. The battle was far from over, but Clara May wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a force, and she'd stop at nothing to bring the system down. The courtroom had become a war zone, and Clara May was at its center. The stakes were sky high, the forces against her powerful beyond measure. But Clara didn't back down from fights. She never had. The deeper she dug into the corruption around Sergeant Boone, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system that had shielded its own for far too long. Clara was the storm ready to tear it apart. The day stretched long, but Clara's resolve only grew stronger. Keene's files sat on her desk, a towering stack of evidence tying Boone, Ramsey, the mayor's office, and a web of law enforcement figures together. She'd gone through every page with meticulous care, knowing there was no room for error. The press was circling, the city was buzzing, but behind the scenes, she knew the real fight was brewing, powerful forces working to protect their own. Her phone buzzed. Carter again. They're pulling out all the stops. Ramsey's making moves. Mayor's office is in damage control. If we go public now, it's going to hit hard. Clara stared at the message, her fingers steady as she typed back, "Let them come. We're not backing down. No fear, no hesitation." Clara had made her choice. The truth was coming out, no matter the cost. She'd spent her life fighting for justice, and this was the fight that would define her. She stood from her desk, the weight of her decision heavy but freeing. She was stepping into uncharted territory, but that's where real change happened. She'd seen it before, and she'd see it again. This moment would shape not just her career, but Charleston's entire justice system. The days blurred into a whirlwind of action. Clara met with reporters, officials, and her trusted allies, bracing for the fallout. The union and the mayor's office were piling on the pressure, but Clara stood firm. She wasn't alone. More people were starting to see the truth, to understand this wasn't just about one cop, but a system that had failed too many for too long. The threats escalated. Strange calls from unknown numbers, cryptic voicemails, and one chilling message. "You need to stop or things will get worse. Don't make us show you how far we can go." The network. Clara didn't blink. She'd known the risks from the start. This fight wasn't just about her. It was for everyone crushed by the system, for the families who'd lost loved ones to unchecked violence, for the victims who'd never seen justice. Her resolve hardened as she prepped for a public hearing to lay bare the evidence against Boone, Ramsey, and the Union. It was time to take this to the people, to show Charleston and the world how deep the rot went. But just as the hearing was set, a tip came from a source in the mayor's office. The mayor was planning to pull Clara off the case, citing a conflict of interest because she was Boone's victim. It was a move to kill the investigation and discredit everything she'd uncovered. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she read the message. They were trying to silence her before she could expose the truth. But Clara wasn't someone who could be shut up. She'd spent her life fighting to be heard, and now she wasn't letting anyone stop her. She called an emergency meeting with Carter, Keene, and her closest allies. The time had come to make her move. The network had done everything to bury the truth, but Clara was more than a judge now. She was a whistleblower, a force for change, and she wasn't stopping until every name was out in the open. "I won't be silenced," Clara said, her voice unyielding. "This is bigger than me, bigger than Boone, bigger than Ramsey. This is about a broken system, and I'm going to make sure the world sees it." Carter nodded, his loyalty unwavering. "We've got you, Clara. Let's bring it down." With the evidence ready, Clara called the press, setting the stage for a public hearing that would shake Charleston to its core. The story was about to break wide open, and she was ready for whatever came next. The tension in the courthouse grew as the hearing loomed. Journalists packed the halls, cameras trained on Clara's chambers. The public was waiting, hungry for the truth. But Clara knew the real fight would happen in that courtroom, and she wasn't letting anyone take it from her. The time had come. The walls were about to crumble. The courthouse was alive with electricity on the day of the hearing. Reporters swarmed the halls, their cameras ready, their eyes sharp for the storm Clara was about to unleash. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Protesters, activists, everyday people, all waiting to see if justice would finally break through. The air was thick with anticipation, every second heavy with the weight of what was coming. Clara walked in with quiet confidence, her head high, despite the battle she'd been waging. Carter flanked her, his face set with determination. Agent Keene followed, carrying the evidence Clara had painstakingly gathered. There was no turning back now. The plan was in motion, every piece falling into place. Clara had outmaneuvered the forces trying to bury this, the mayor's office, the union, the prosecutors. Inside the courtroom, the tension was suffocating. Journalists packed the back, cameras rolling, pens flying. Ada Carson Ramsey sat at his table, stiff and pale, his eyes locked on Clara as she entered. He looked scared, and he should be. The walls were closing in. Beside him, reps from the mayor's office and the union sat grim-faced, clinging to their fading power. Clara took her seat at the bench with purpose, the silence deepening as every eye turned to her. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. The stakes couldn't be higher. She didn't waste time. Her voice cut through the room, commanding and clear. I stand here today not just as a judge, but as a witness to a system that's failed its people, letting corruption and abuse run unchecked for far too long. Her words hit like a thunderclap, the room hanging on every syllable. I've spent my life fighting for justice, for truth, Clara continued. But what I've found is a network that's poisoned this system. Officers like Sergeant Boone have brutalized people without consequence. Prosecutors like Carson Ramsey have covered for them. And the very institutions meant to protect us have been protecting the powerful instead. Her gaze swept the room, unyielding. Even Ramsey couldn't look away, his composure crumbling under the weight of her words. He knew his time was up. Clara turned to the reporters, her voice rising. Today we won't stay silent. We won't let the system shield those who abuse their power. Today the truth comes out. She pulled the files before her, laying out the evidence with deliberate precision, missing body cam footage, silenced victims, wire transfers tying the union and mayor's office to Boone's defense fund. Each piece was a hammer blow to the system's integrity, each one tightening the noose around Ramsey and his allies. Ramsey's face paled, his hands shaking as he shifted in his seat. His calm was gone, his fear laid bare for all to see. This is the end for you, Ramsey, Clara said, her voice sharp and unyielding. You've protected Boone, ignored the abuses happening right under your nose. You've failed the people you swore to serve, and now you'll face the consequences. Ramsey opened his mouth, but no words came. He was done, and he knew it. Clara pressed on, her voice fierce. This isn't just about one officer's crimes. It's about a system built on corruption and fear, a system that's let the powerful act like they're above the law. We're here to tear that system down. The room was still, her words echoing like a battle cry. The truth was out, and no one could unhear it. Clara stood, her posture strong. The charges against Boone, Ramsey, and their allies will be investigated. The evidence is clear. This isn't just about punishment. It's about rebuilding a system that can't tolerate corruption anymore. She turned to the reporters, her eyes blazing. You've heard the truth today. Now it's on you, the press, the people, to hold the system accountable. Make sure the changes we need happen. This fight doesn't end with me. It starts with all of us." Her words reverberated, shaking the room and beyond. Charleston would never be the same. The truth was out, and it wasn't going back in the shadows. The courtroom fell silent after Clara's speech, the weight of her words pressing down like a physical force. Every eye was on her, journalists, witnesses, colleagues she'd worked with for years. For the first time, Clara felt the world truly watching, and it fueled her fire. But this wasn't a victory lap. It was the start of a long, brutal fight. The corruption she'd exposed wouldn't vanish in a single hearing. It would take time, grit, and everything she had to keep pushing. Ramsey sat at his table, his confidence shattered, his career in ruins. The evidence Clara had laid out was airtight, and he had no defense left. But Clara wasn't focused on his downfall. This wasn't about one man. It was about dismantling the system that had propped him up. As the hearing wrapped up, Clara's allies moved into action. Carter worked with the press, making sure every detail hit the headlines. Keene and her team were already planning to dig deeper, pulling more evidence to build the case against the network that had shielded Boone and Ramsey. The goal was clear: expose it all, let the public see the rot, and make sure it could never be buried again. Outside, the protests grew louder, the crowd swelling with anger and hope. Clara knew this wasn't just about legal reform anymore. It was about rebuilding trust in a system that had betrayed too many for too long. As she adjourned the session, a reporter's voice cut through the room. "Judge May, is this the end for Ramsey and Boone?" Clara didn't hesitate. "This is the beginning," she said, her voice clear and firm. "It's not just about them. It's about a system that's let them run wild. It's about everyone who's been hurt, ignored, or silenced. It's about making the law work for everyone, not just the powerful." The reporters scrambled, the room buzzing with energy. Clara wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a voice for the voiceless, a spark for change. But she knew the fight was far from over. The forces against her were already regrouping, trying to discredit her, to silence her. They'd throw everything they had, but Clara was ready. That night, back in her chambers, exhaustion crept in, but she pushed it aside. The courthouse was empty, the press gone, but the fight was just heating up. Her phone buzzed. Carter again. "Boone's lawyers are pushing for his release. They're trying to turn this into a media circus." Clara leaned back, her fingers steepling. If they got their way, they could spin the narrative, turn the tide. She wasn't going to let that happen. This wasn't just about Boone's release, it was about what it would mean. The system they'd built wasn't going down without a fight, but Clara knew how to play their game and beat them at it. She typed a quick reply to Carter. "Let's make sure they don't control the story. Time to go on the offensive." Clara stood, her resolve unshaken. There were still questions to answer, still names to expose, but she had the truth, and that was her weapon. The fight wasn't over, but Clara May was ready for whatever came next. The truth was out, and it was going to change everything.